The room enveloped us in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. My husband, Adrian, whom I had spent 29 years with, sat across from me, his eyes glued to the TV, as usual, ignoring my presence. Lost in my thoughts, I felt the weight of years of unspoken grievances and suppressed anger. I had reached my limit. "Did you finish moving?" Adrian's voice, edged with his usual condescension, pierced the silence. I didn't look at him as I replied, "I'm leaving, Adrian." My voice remained calm, but inside, a storm was raging. Adrian scoffed. "Oh, really? And where will you go, Ava? You can't survive without me." His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. For too long, I had endured his dismissive attitude and his mother's incessant meddling. It was time to reclaim my life. "I'll manage," I said, standing up. I felt empowered despite the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead. His mother, who had been living with us for the past year, walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw my packed bags. "Running away, are we?" she sneered. "I knew you didn't have the spine to handle this family." Ignoring her, I grabbed my bags and headed towards the door. Adrian didn't move to stop me. Instead, he called out, "You'll be back. You need us." As I stepped out of the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The cool evening breeze felt like a balm to my suffocated soul. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. For 29 years, I had played the dutiful wife to Adrian, a man who saw me more as a convenience than a partner. Our son, Jack, was the only light in my life, but even he couldn't fill the growing void in my heart. Adrian's mother, with her constant criticisms and manipulations, only added to the toxicity of our home. I found a small apartment, modest but peaceful. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and think without judgment. In the following days, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages from Adrian and his mother. They fluctuated between pleading and threats, but I was done listening. My coworkers at the library, where I had worked part-time for years, were supportive. They had seen the changes in me, the gradual loss of my spirit. Now they witnessed my rebirth. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, my phone rang. It was Jack. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "I am, Jack. Better than I've been in years," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Dad and Grandma, they're not taking it well. Dad's been drinking, and Grandma won't stop talking about how you've abandoned them." A pain of guilt hit me, but I pushed it away. "They'll manage, Jack. They need to learn to respect others." Jack was silent for a moment. "I'm glad you're finally thinking about yourself, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." As I hung up the phone, I realized this was just the beginning. Adrian and his mother had underestimated me for years. It was time to show them that I was no longer the woman they thought they could control. My journey of self-discovery and revenge had just begun. In my small apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I had taken with me, I reflected on the past 29 years with Adrian. Our marriage, once filled with promise, had slowly disintegrated into a shadow of what it could have been. It all started blissfully. Adrian was charming and attentive, and we were young and full of dreams. But as the years passed, the charm faded, revealing a man more interested in his own needs than those of his family. When Jack was born, I thought it would bring us closer, but it only highlighted our differences. Adrian's idea of parenting was providing financially, leaving the emotional nurturing to me. His mother, Elizabeth, always hovered in the background, her criticism of my parenting a constant drone. "Ava, you're coddling the boy too much," Elizabeth would say. Adrian never needed all this fuss. I endured her jibes, focusing on Jack, who grew up to be a thoughtful and independent young man. Despite the tension at home, the turning point came when Elizabeth moved in with us. Adrian didn't even discuss it with me. One day, I returned home to find her bags in the hallway. "My house is too lonely," she had said, a manipulative glint in her eye. Living with Elizabeth was suffocating. She criticized everything, from my cooking to the way I dressed. "Adrian could have done so much better," she would often say within my earshot. But what truly broke me was discovering Adrian's betrayal. I stumbled upon bank statements revealing large withdrawals from our joint account, funding Elizabeth's gambling habit and Adrian's secret indulgences. Confronting them led to heated arguments, with Adrian always siding with his mother. "She's my mother, Ava. She needs this to cope with her loneliness," he would argue, dismissive of my concerns. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between them plotting to take control of the finances completely, reducing me to nothing but an occupant in their house. I knew then that I couldn't live in that shadow any longer. The day I left, I promised myself that they would one day understand the pain they had caused. My plan was simple yet effective. I would hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their finances. I started by legally separating our finances, a move that shocked Adrian. "What do you think you're doing?" he yelled over the phone. "Protecting myself, something I should have done years ago," I replied, my voice calm but firm. Elizabeth's reaction was even more dramatic. "You ungrateful wretch. After everything we've done for you." She screeched when she found out. But I was unmoved. The years of submission were over. I was playing by my own rules now, and this was just the beginning of their karma. The weeks following my financial independence were tumultuous. Adrian and Elizabeth were furious, their true natures fully exposed in their anger. I received countless calls, each more venomous than the last. "You think you're clever, Ava?" Adrian hissed during one call. "You're nothing without me. You'll come crawling back." "I won't, Adrian. I'm done being your puppet," I replied, my newfound strength bolstering my words. Elizabeth was even more vitriolic. "You'll regret this, Ava. You've ruined our family." "There was no family to ruin, Elizabeth. It was an illusion," I shot back. Despite their threats, I felt liberated. The fear that once controlled me had evaporated, replaced by a resolute desire for justice. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I started by reaching out to old friends and acquaintances and sharing my story. The truth about Adrian and Elizabeth's manipulations and financial deceit quickly spread, tarnishing their reputations. Adrian, who prided himself on his social standing, was appalled. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded during a rare face-to-face encounter. "You did this to yourself," I replied calmly. "I'm just shedding light on it." Elizabeth, faced with the community's judgment, was equally distraught. "You've turned everyone against us. This is war, Ava." But I was no longer intimidated by her. "No, Elizabeth, this is justice," I replied. I watched as their world crumbled. Adrian's friends began to distance themselves, wary of his tarnished image. Elizabeth's social circle, once a source of her pride, dwindled as the truth about her gambling and manipulation spread. But I didn't stop there. I knew their financial instability was their weakest point. With the help of a lawyer, I began the process of claiming my share of our joint assets, ensuring that Elizabeth's gambling debts were exposed and Adrian's mismanagement of our finances was brought to light. The court proceedings were grueling, but I stood my ground. Adrian and Elizabeth's attempts to discredit me fell flat. Their lies and deceit were no match for the truth. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant portion of our assets. I saw the defeat in Adrian and Elizabeth's eyes. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. "You've destroyed us, Ava," Adrian said, a shadow of his former arrogant self. "No, Adrian, you destroyed us long ago. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied, walking out of the courtroom. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I looked forward to the future, free from the chains of my past. Adrian and Elizabeth's downfall was the first step in my journey of reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind. With my rightful share of the assets, I began building a life free from Adrian and Elizabeth's shadow. Their reactions, however, were a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this to us, Ava," Adrian exclaimed over the phone one evening, his voice laced with desperation. "I've done nothing but take back what's mine," I replied firmly. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me." Elizabeth's response was more underhanded. She tried to rally family members against me, painting herself as a victim. But her attempts were futile. "Ava, you're tearing this family apart," she accused during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "This family was broken long before I left," I countered, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I relished the freedom of living on my own terms. I changed my phone number, cutting off their direct line of harassment. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others who had faced similar struggles. But my quest for justice wasn't over. I discovered that Elizabeth was planning to contest the court's decision, still clinging to the hope of reclaiming money for her gambling habits. "You won't get away with this, Ava. I'll make sure of it," she threatened in a message relayed through a relative. In response, I fortified my legal defenses, prepared to counter any move she made. I was no longer the woman who shied away from confrontation. I was a fighter standing up for what was rightfully mine. Meanwhile, Adrian was crumbling under the pressure. His once pristine image was now tarnished, and his career suffered as a result. The friends and connections valued so much were now distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with a man caught in scandal. "You've ruined me, Ava," he lamented during a rare moment of reflection. "You ruined yourself, Adrian. I just exposed the truth." As the weeks turned into months, I watched as their once secure world disintegrated. Elizabeth's attempt to contest the court's decision failed miserably, leaving her financially and socially bankrupt. Adrian's career continued its downward spiral, his reputation irreparably damaged. But despite their downfall, I felt no joy in their suffering. It was a necessary step in my journey, but it was not the end. I had reclaimed my independence and my dignity, but I was still healing from years of neglect and emotional abuse. As I continued to rebuild my life, I focused on finding peace and happiness within myself. I had emerged from the shadows of my past stronger and more resilient. My story was not one of revenge, but of emancipation, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Several months had passed since the court's decision, and the ripples of my actions were still felt. Adrian and Elizabeth, now estranged from most of their acquaintances, were living a shadow of their former lives. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Jack. He looked troubled, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. "Mom, I just came from seeing Dad and Grandma," he began, his voice heavy. "They're not doing well." I offered him a seat and a warm cup of tea. "Tell me what happened, Jack," I said. He sighed deeply before continuing. "Dad's been let go from his job. His drinking has gotten worse, and Grandma, she's lost everything to gambling. They're selling the house." I listened, my heart aching for Jack. Despite everything, they were still his family. "Mom, did we go too far?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, we stood up for what's right. They made their choices," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. The news of their misfortune didn't bring me joy. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the consequences of a life lived without integrity and respect for others. The following weeks were filled with whispers and rumors. Adrian and Elizabeth's house, once a symbol of their success, was now on the Adrianette. Their fall from grace was complete. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Adrian had tried to find work, but his reputation preceded him. Elizabeth, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circles. Her gambling addiction was now public knowledge. One evening, while I was out for a walk, I saw Adrian. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his posture slumped, his eyes hollow. Our paths crossed, and for a moment, we stood there in silence. "Ava?" he began, his voice cracking. "There's nothing to say, Adrian," I interrupted. "You chose your path." He nodded slowly, a resigned look in his eyes. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. As I walked away, leaving Adrian behind, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once held so much power over me was now just a stranger with a broken past. Elizabeth, too, faded into obscurity. Her once lively demeanor was now subdued, the realities of her actions finally catching up to her. As the chapter of Adrian and Elizabeth closed, I realized that my journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and finding peace. I had stood up to my oppressors, not for vengeance, but for justice and self-respect. The experience had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I continued to build my new life, I embraced the lessons learned and looked forward to the future, free from the shadows of the past. With newfound strength and a heart ready to embrace the future, months turned into a year since the upheaval of my life began. In this time, my journey of self-reinvention continued, with each day bringing new strengths and realizations. The downfall of Adrian and Elizabeth was not my endgame. It was merely a byproduct of my pursuit for justice and respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat in my cozy living room, the warm sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting on the changes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jack. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something," Jack said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Elo and I are getting married, and we'd love for you to help us with the planning." Joy surged through me. "That's wonderful news, Jack. Of course, I'd love to help." Our conversation was filled with laughter and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the calls filled with distress and despair from the past. A few days later, while out for my regular walk, I encountered Elizabeth. She seemed smaller, diminished somehow. Our eyes met, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret perhaps, or realization, in hers. "Hava," she began, her voice quivering. I'm sorry." The apology, unexpected and late, caught me off guard. "Elizabeth, your actions brought you here. I hope you find some peace." As I walked away, leaving Elizabeth standing alone, I realized the full extent of my transformation. I no longer harbored anger or resentment. I had moved beyond the need for revenge. The wedding planning with Jack and Aloan was a joyful affair. It was during these moments surrounded by love and hope that I truly appreciated the beauty of moving forward. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and tears of joy. Watching Jack and Aloan still full of love and promise, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, we had emerged stronger. In my toast, I said, "Life brings many challenges, but it's how we face them that defines us." Today, we celebrate love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the happy faces, feeling content. I had not only survived, I had thrived. In the years that followed, Adrian and Elizabeth remained distant memories. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved away, each carrying their burdens. My life, once overshadowed by their presence, was now my own. I found fulfillment in my work, joy in my role as a mother and friend, and peace in my solitary moments. As I sat in my garden one sunny afternoon, watching the flowers bloom, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. My journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it led me to a place of contentment and strength. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own life. In this new chapter, I found happiness, peace, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away. In conclusion, my journey has been a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of self-discovery. From the shadows of a challenging past emerged a stronger, more empowered version of myself. The trials and tribulations, engendered by the downfall of those who once held sway over my life, paved the way for a brighter future filled with love, joy, and a newfound sense of freedom. I appreciate your time in following my narrative, and I hope my story has resonated with you in some way. If you enjoyed the journey, I appreciate you subscribing for more tales of triumph and transformation. Your support means the world to me, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the story. How is the narrative for you? Feel free to share your feedback, and thank you for being a part of this storytelling adventure.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. but carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.